The standard becomes visible. A purposeful man still feels fear. He still faces uncertainty. He still makes mistakes, but he no longer negotiates with every passing mood because his life is tied to something deeper than emotion. He has chosen a path, and that path begins to train him. The second principle is self-command. A purposeful life cannot be built by impulse. It must be governed by deliberate authority over thought, speech, action, and habit. The world often teaches people to follow their feelings as if emotion were a trustworthy leader. But feelings rise and fall. They are, too, unstable to build a meaningful life upon. Self-command means that a man learns to lead himself even when his emotions resist him. He does what is right before it feels easy. He keeps his word before he feels inspired. He acts according to principle before he receives applause. This is where true freedom begins. Many people imagine freedom as the absence of restraint, but that is an immature definition. Real freedom is the ability to direct yourself instead of being directed by appetite, fear, laziness, distraction, or social pressure. A man who cannot command himself will always be commanded by something lesser. He may appear independent on the outside, yet remain inwardly ruled by comfort and impulse. But the man who governs himself acquires a quiet power that circumstances cannot easily shake. He becomes reliable to himself, and that reliability becomes the root of confidence. The third principle is intentional thought. The life a man lives outwardly is deeply connected to the thought he rehearses inwardly. If he repeatedly entertains weakness, he will begin to move weakly. If he constantly thinks in confusion, he will create confused results. If he allows bitterness, envy, and self-pity to dominate his inner world, then even opportunity will feel heavy in his hands. Thought is not everything, but it is where direction begins. A disciplined life requires a disciplined inner conversation. A man must learn to question the thoughts that make him passive and strengthen the thoughts that make him responsible, courageous, and steady. This does not mean pretending pain does not exist. It means refusing to hand your future over to the most discouraging voice in your mind. It means choosing interpretation carefully. When life becomes difficult, the drifting man says, "This is proof that I cannot handle it." The purposeful man says, "This is training. This is instruction. This is part of the cost of becoming stronger." The event may be the same, but the philosophy is different, and philosophy shapes endurance. A man who assigns noble meaning to hardship can survive more than the man who sees every hardship as a personal curse. The fourth principle is acceptance of responsibility. The moment a person begins to mature, he stops asking, "Who is to blame?" and starts asking, "What is mine to do?" Now, this question restores power. Blame may contain facts, but it rarely builds a future. Responsibility does. Even when the world has been unfair, even when others have failed you, even when your past has left marks, you still face a daily choice. You can remain psychologically chained to what happened, or you can take ownership of what happens next. The philosophical solution is not denial of pain, but refusal to build an identity around helplessness. Responsibility is heavy, but it is also liberating. Because once a man accepts that his responses are his own, he becomes dangerous to stagnation. He no longer waits to be rescued. He no longer depends on ideal conditions. He no longer organizes his life around excuses. He begins to ask better questions. What can I build with what I have? What must I stop tolerating? What habit is weakening me? What standard must I raise? What truth have I been avoiding? These questions awaken the sleeping parts of character. They force a person back into authorship of his own life. The fifth principle is living by design rather than by default. Most people do not consciously choose their days. They repeat them. A life of purpose requires design. It requires setting times for reflection, for work, for study, for silence, for physical discipline, and for meaningful action. It requires building days that express your values instead of merely reacting to demands. A purposeful life is not created in rare dramatic moments. It is created in repeated daily structure. Small, consistent acts become identity over time. A man becomes strong not by admiring strength, but by practicing it in ordinary hours. Design also protects the mind from chaos. When you know what matters and build your life around it, you become less vulnerable to distraction, comparison, and emotional waste. You no longer need to ask every morning what kind of person you will to be that day. You have already decided, and your routines reinforce the decision. Day after day, the structure begins to carry you, even when motivation is low. That is one of the deepest truths of personal transformation. You do not rise by intensity alone. You rise by order, by repetition, and by fidelity to what matters. And beneath all of these principles is one final truth. A meaningful life is built from the inside out, not from status first, not from applause first, not from appearance first, but from character first. A man who gains external success without inner order remains fragile. But the man who builds inner order can endure difficulty without losing himself. He can move through setbacks without collapsing into drift because his life is rooted in something deeper than temporary results. He has learned that purpose is not a mood, discipline is not punishment, responsibility is not a burden to resent, and self-mastery is not a luxury. It is the foundation of a life that does not break under pressure. So the philosophical solution is clear. Choose a definite purpose. Govern yourself by principle. Direct your thoughts with care. Accept responsibility fully and build your life by design. Do this long enough and drift begins to lose its power. The mind grows sharper, the will grows stronger, the spirit grows steadier, and the man who once wandered begins to walk with intention. Through that transformation, he does not merely improve his circumstances. He becomes the kind of person who can build a meaningful life on purpose and sustain it with strength. Action is the bridge between vision and identity. A man may think noble thoughts and speak powerful intentions, but until those intentions are translated into movement, his life remains unchanged. This is why action holds such power. It does not merely produce results. It reshapes the person who takes it. The moment a man acts with decision, he sends a message to his mind that says, I am no longer waiting for life to move. First, I am moving first. And that message begins to change everything. Many people believe confidence comes before action, but in reality, confidence is often the product of action, not the condition for it. The man who waits to feel fully ready usually remains still because readiness is rarely complete before movement begins. Clarity deepens through motion. Strength develops through use. Courage grows when it is exercised, not when it is admired from a distance. This is why decisive action has almost spiritual force. It breaks the illusion that you must first become fearless before you begin. In truth, you become stronger because you begin. Action also interrupts the cycle of overthinking. The drifting mind lives in endless internal debate. It measures every possibility, imagines every risk, and postpones commitment until the moment loses its power. But movement cuts through. Confusion. A single disciplined step can do more for a man than hours of anxious thought. Because action creates evidence. It reveals what works, what fails, what must be adjusted, and what must be abandoned. In that sense, action is not the opposite of thinking. It is the test that gives thinking value. Without action, thought becomes fog. With action, thought becomes strategy. There is another reason action matters so deeply. It restores self-respect. Every time a man does what he said he would do, he strengthens the bond between word and character. He begins to trust himself again. This trust is the root of inner power. Not empty optimism, not dramatic emotion, but the quiet knowledge that when the moment comes, he can rely on his own will. A man who keeps promises to himself walks differently. He carries less hesitation because his life contains proof that he can move even when resistance is present. Action is also the cure for helplessness. When a person remains still for too long, he begins to feel trapped by circumstance. He sees obstacles as larger than they are because inactivity magnifies fear. But the moment he begins to act, his relationship with the obstacle changes. He may not solve everything at once, but he breaks the spell of passivity. He remembers that he still has agency, that his hands still matter, that his choices still shape outcomes. Even small action can reignite a fading spirit, because motion reminds the soul that it was built to create, not merely to endure. This is why purposeful people do not worship motivation. They respect momentum. Motivation is unstable. It rises and falls with emotion. Momentum is different. Momentum is built through repeated action. It becomes a force that carries a man forward, even on difficult days. Once movement becomes habitual, resistance loses some of its authority. The mind stops asking whether it feels like acting and begins to understand that action is simply what must be done. This is the hidden gift of disciplined movement. It turns progress from an emotional event into a way of life. Yet action must be more than frantic busyness. It must be directed. A man can fill his days with motion and still remain far from meaning. True action is aligned with purpose. It is not movement for the sake of noise, but movement in service of what matters. It asks, what step today brings me closer to the life I claim to want? What decision strengthens my future instead of numbing my present? This kind of action has weight because it is connected to identity. It is not random effort, it is chosen effort. The power of action is that it pulls the future into the present. A dream remains distant until a man gives it physical expression through labor, discipline, repetition, and decision. Once he does that, the dream is no longer fantasy. It has entered the real world. And from that moment, it can be shaped, refined, and strengthened. That is how lives change. Not in one dramatic leap, but through repeated acts of courage that turn intention into structure. In the end, action is power because it transforms thought into reality, fear into training, and potential into evidence. It teaches the mind that forward is possible even when conditions are imperfect. The man who learns to act before he feels fully ready becomes dangerous to drift because he no longer needs ideal emotion to make meaningful progress. He has discovered a law that weak men resist and strong men live by. Life begins to change the moment you stop asking whether you are ready and start moving with what you already have. Environment shapes direction more than most people realize. A man may believe his life is driven only by personal will, but over time, the voices around him, the standards he sees, and the atmosphere he lives in begin to influence what he accepts as normal. This influence is often subtle. It does not always force a decision. It simply lowers or raises the level at which a person thinks, acts, and expects. When a man spends enough time in an environment where distraction is, normal excuses are common and mediocrity is tolerated. He slowly absorbs those patterns without noticing. His ambition weakens, not because he has lost all desire, but because he is surrounded by examples that make lesser living appear acceptable. The same is true in the opposite direction. Place a person in an environment where discipline is respected, growth is expected, and responsibility is lived out consistently, and something begins to rise within him. He starts to feel the way. Difference between movement and stagnation, between intention and drift. He becomes less willing to waste time because the environment around him keeps reminding him of what is possible. This is why influence must be taken seriously. The people around you are not only affecting your mood, they are affecting your standards. Your standards then shape your actions, and your actions eventually shape your destiny. Many people try to build a better life while staying loyal to environments that are weakening them. They want clarity while living in constant noise. They want confidence while surrounded by cynicism. They want discipline while keeping habits, and relationships that reward comfort over growth. This creates inner conflict because no man rises easily when his daily environment is pulling him downward. A strong mind matters, but wisdom also means reducing unnecessary friction. A man must ask whether his surroundings are strengthening his purpose or slowly dissolving it. Environment is not only people, it is also what you watch, what you listen to, what you read, and what you repeatedly expose your mind to. Every repeated influence plants something. If the mind is fed with confusion, comparison, and empty stimulation, it becomes harder to hold a noble aim. But if it is fed with truth, order, and meaningful ideas, it becomes easier to think clearly and act with force. The mind reflects what it consumes. This is why intentional living requires intentional environment. Choose company that calls you upward. Choose inputs that sharpen your mind. Choose spaces that support, focus, and self-command. A man does not become strong by accident. He becomes strong in part because he learns to protect his inner life from influences that make weakness feel normal, and to remain close to influences that remind him who he is capable of becoming. A daily discipline system begins with one truth. A purposeful life is not truth built in rare moments of inspiration. It is built in repeated ordinary actions that train the mind to obey what matters most. If a man wants a stronger future, he must create a structure that reduces drift and strengthens intention every single day. Discipline is not about making life harsh. It is about making progress dependable. The first habit is morning direction. A man should not begin the day in reaction to noise, messages, or distraction. He should begin by reminding himself who he is becoming and what must be done. Even 10 quiet minutes of reflection can reset the mind. He should review his purpose, look at his key goals, and decide what actions matter most that day. This creates internal command before the world begins making demands. The second habit is a daily period of focused work. Every day there should be a block of time protected for meaningful effort, not shallow activity. This is where real progress is made. A man must train himself to work without constant interruption because attention is one of the foundations of achievement. If he cannot direct his attention, he will struggle to direct his life. Focused work teaches patience, sharpens will, and turns intention into visible results. The third habit is physical discipline. The body and the mind are closely connected. When a man neglects his body, he often weakens his energy, mood, and self-command. Simple consistency in movement, walking, training, stretching, or exercise builds more than health. It builds a pattern of self-respect. It teaches the mind that discomfort is not an enemy and that strength is something practiced, not wished for. The fourth habit is written accountability. A man should write down what he planned, what he completed, and what must improve. This habit is powerful because writing removes illusion. It shows whether the day was directed or wasted. It turns vague ambition into measurable behavior. Even a short evening review can expose drift before it grows stronger. A person who reflects daily corrects faster than a person who only thinks occasionally. The fifth habit is guarding the final hour of the day. What enters the mind at night often shapes the next morning. A disciplined man does not end each day in endless noise. He creates a calm close to the day through reading, reflection, gratitude, or preparation for tomorrow. This protects sleep, reduces mental clutter, and helps him begin the next day with greater clarity. In the end, a daily discipline system is not complicated. It is built on direction, focus, movement, review, and mental protection. Practiced consistently, these habits create order, and order creates power. Over time, the man who lives this way becomes less controlled by mood, less vulnerable to distraction, and more capable of building a life that reflects his purpose rather than his impulses. The final warning is simple. A man does not need to choose destruction directly in order to lose his life. He only needs to keep postponing what matters. He only needs to keep living without a clear aim, and the years will do the rest. That is the danger of drift. It does not always feel like ruin while it is happening. It feels like delay. It feels like comfort. It feels like there is still time. But a life can be wasted quietly long before it collapses visibly. Do not assume that because nothing dramatic has gone wrong, everything is fine. A person can be slowly abandoning his future while appearing stable on the surface. He can be functioning without truly living, moving without direction, speaking about change without ever becoming changed. This is how many people reach a painful moment later in life and realize that their greatest failure was not one bad decision, but 1,000 days of unconscious surrender. Time does not pause while you hesitate. Your unused strength does not remain untouched forever. Your deeper calling does not grow louder if you keep ignoring it. There comes a point when repeated delay becomes identity, and what was once a temporary habit becomes a permanent way of being. So take this warning seriously. If you continue to live without purpose, without discipline, and without deliberate action, you will not merely stay where you are. You will slowly become less than you could have been. And there is no heavier burden than meeting the future as a diminished version of your then. Let this be the moment you stop drifting. Let this be the line between the life that happened by default and the life you now choose by design. You do not need a perfect past to begin. You do not need perfect certainty. You do not need to feel fearless. You need a decision. You need the courage to say, my life will no longer be governed by distraction, hesitation, and unconscious habit. It will be governed by purpose, discipline, and action. The future is not built in one grand performance. It is built in the choices you make when no one is watching. It is built in the thoughts you permit, the standards you keep, the work you complete, and the direction you refuse to abandon. Day by day you are becoming someone. The question is whether you are becoming that person by accident or by intention. So rise now, write the goal, make the plan, guard your mind, strengthen your habits, choose your environment, act before you feel fully ready, and when resistance appears, as it will, do not retreat. Meet it like a man who has finally remembered that his life is his responsibility. You were not made to live scattered. You were not made to spend your years in hesitation. You were made to build, to grow, to lead yourself with strength, and to live with unmistakable purpose. The time for drifting is over. Step forward and become the man your future is waiting for.